Okay, my name is Adam Lippin, and I'm the founder and CEO of HearMe.app, which is an app that's designed to bring people together. When anybody needs to get something off their chest, there's someone on the other line who can be there, hear them, validate them, and essentially allow for real-time text-based conversations for anyone who wants to get anything off their chest. And I've been a member of the Listen First Coalition for about a year now. And the thing that I love about it is that it's a group of organizations that are really interested in, civic virtues, right? Right now we all know, because we wouldn't be on this call if we didn't know about all the divides that are happening in this country. And it's a little bit like preaching to the converted because you're all here. But one of the things I'm most excited about for this particular call is we have three incredible leaders in the corporate world. And I was telling them earlier, I've never been in the corporate world. I've always sort of either had my own company, but I've never been in the corporate environment. And I don't know if that's everyone's experience, but my assumption is that many of us don't have that sort of C-suite, high-level corporate background. And
sorry. Apologies.
Listening across divides from a political perspective, we all sort of understand, but we spend a lot of time in the workforce. We bring ourselves to the workforce.
Sorry, I'm going to mute.
And companies are dealing with these issues. So my name is Adam Lippin, Adam at HearMe.app. You can find me on LinkedIn if anybody has any questions after this, et cetera. But I want to go right into introducing our panel. So right next to me, we have Kathy Mandato. Kathy Mandato is a wonderful human being. And I just want to say one more thing. So I've got to know Kathy and Matt and Tracy. All of them, other than being, incredibly respected in their fields and doing really wonderful work in the corporate world, trying to make it a little nicer, for a lack of another way to say it. They're really wonderful people, and having the privilege of getting to know them has been really gratifying. But I will tee them up in terms of their sort of experience and qualifications of being on this panel. So Kathy has been a Chief Human Resource Officer for Warner Media, a VP Human Resource Officer for Snap, Executive Vice President, NBC Universal, Senior Vice President, Comcast. Matt Gersten is currently the Chief Learning Officer at Better Everyday Studios. He was a training manager at SpaceX. He was a training instructor in the US Air Force. Tracy Lawrence is the founder and CEO of the Lawrence Academy, which is known for hiring, coaching, and building high-performance teams with an emphasis on innovation and performance. She was recently named the first executive in residence at USC's Marshall School of Business. She uses her real-world experience to advise Fortune 500 companies, private equity firms, asset management companies, media and technology companies, and nonprofits in creating teams that drive growth and performance. She's held leadership roles at Viacom, Kraft, Nestle, as well as others. She has an undergrad, a BA in economics from Stanford University, and an MBA from Harvard University. So we're dealing with a pretty accomplished group of people here, and I'm really excited for them to share their experience and me being able to ask them questions about what's really going on in the workforce, and how do we take these civic conversations that we're all having, and what role does the corporations have, and sort of get their feedback on it. So I'm going to jump right in to the first question. And the first question is, they all get invited to do a lot of panels and a lot of discussions. And so I just want to ask them what inspired you to agree to be on this panel. Do you have a lot of other offers? This is a little bit out of left field, perhaps. So I'd like to maybe have Kathy with that question first.
All right, thank you, Adam. Well, what inspired me to be on the panel really started probably 6 months ago when I met Adam. And it was I thought, a fairly fortuitous meeting. At the time that I was introduced to him by a friend of mine who started a thing called the Dialogue Project, which was all about having more dialogue with one another, I was actually in the midst of reading a book on loneliness. And I had just read an article in, can't remember if it was the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, on how loneliness breeds anarchy. And we were right in the middle of the election and all of the things that went along with that. So all of these things just sort of came together in my life at one time. And my friend who started the Dialogue Project introduced me to Adam, and I thought, okay, there's a reason why I'm meeting this person who started this listening platform called HearMe. So I decided to really lean into that and be part of his advisory board, but also just try to figure out how can we bring this message to the world of listening. And I thought to myself, I, for one, have just taken listening for granted all these years. But I wouldn't say that I've always practiced it well. So I just thought it was a real opportunity to develop myself and to learn about how we can scale, frankly, something that all of us can do well, listening. So that's really what inspired me.
Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I thought it's a fascinating topic because I've noticed in the last year and a half, with the emphasis on, social justice, equity, election issues, I have found people to be more willing to listen lately than I have experienced in the past. Not everybody, but I do find that I'm often surprised at people's just kind of realization that maybe they haven't been listening and being able to listen, or at least having the intention to try to listen in a different way. And so I think it's a really, really important topic. So happy to be here and engage with you all.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, and for me, the main reason I wanted to be here was because, with my work in training, I spent a lot of time trying to understand how the brain processes information and how you can make effective behavior change for people. And half the battle in that is making people feel comfortable, developing that space of psychological safety so they're willing to accept feedback and then act on it. Because when you're asking somebody to change themselves, that's a big ask. We're really designed biologically to protect ourselves emotionally. And as I've gotten to know you and the HearMe space, it's really just become clear how critical listening, active listening, empathetic listening is to create that space for somebody to be willing to be vulnerable enough to question their actions and think about changing their behavior. And so it just seems really critical.
It's really interesting because when I think of a workplace, I generally, these words, which are sort of very much in my vocabulary because of sort of where I want to be in my life at this point, but I don't generally think of the word empathy, listening in a corporate environment. I tend to think of the opposite. And, so I guess what I would sort of, with that in mind and the fact that you're corporate leaders, are there key things that corporate leaders are currently doing or not doing, which is not sort of allowing the full expression of listening and presence and, the whole notion of psychological safety, which sort of, to my understanding, is allowing people to feel safe to share what they want to share and feel supported by that and be real participants. So how do corporate leaders juggle this and sort of where are they? So Tracy mentioned that she sees more of an effort, more people willing to listen lately. Are corporate leaders there, or what do they need to do? And what is their role and responsibility in all of this? So I guess, Tracy, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I am observing, like I said, in the last year is that there's more awareness among corporate leaders that maybe they haven't been listening. Listening is a key leadership competency. It's something that when we work with leadership teams, like we teach listening. It is a really important skill for a senior leader to be able to have. But one of the things, and I think, a lot of them do have some basic listening skills, but one of the things I think people really are developing is awareness of how they listen. So we often listen with an agenda. We listen to confirm what we already believe. We don't want to hear things that defy our own conception of the way the world works. And so I think what's happened since George Floyd and some of the other incidents you've seen last year is that people realize that maybe what they thought the way the world works isn't necessarily, they may be missing some information, right? So they have to reconceive of how they listen. So we do teach people to listen with empathy and curiosity, and to really be able to try to step out of that listening for agenda purposes, and really putting themselves in the shoes of another person.
So thank you, Matt. Like, coming from the environment where you've trained people at SpaceX and the military, where is empathy? Like, how does that translate into, rocket science, literally, or keeping the country safe?
I think so often it just comes down to making sure you're making the right decisions and the best decisions. I think there's plenty of research. We've talked about it in previous discussions around the idea that a diverse team is the best team. You need to get those diverse points of view out there. And so if you really want to make sure you're making the best decision, picking the right path forward, you have to create that space where everybody feels comfortable raising their hand. Everybody believes that they are going to be heard. And I think, historically, that's been, we've been, like you said, most of my, outside the military, most of my corporate experience has been in the technology sector, which is just like really fast paced, really driven, and so what's historically happened is people just haven't believe they had the time. They've just been like, I'm moving too fast. And in moving too fast, by not listening, that leads them to, not being open to outside ideas, not recruiting from places that they wouldn't expect. And so over time, that leads to kind of a siloing of ideas. And you just don't have as many things, as many different ideas at your disposal to bring forward because you're not listening. And so that's why it's so critical to treat that space.
So, Kathy, I don't know a lot about human resources, but I guess, human resources means dealing with human beings in a corporate world. And I imagine that requires dealing with different stakeholders, employees, as well as, the leadership team that might have different goals. So how does, from an HR perspective, listening, empathy, where does this come into play, and how important is this for human resource officers? Do they feel connected to this? Is that something that's changed?
That's a really good question, because it has, well, I'm not so sure it's changed, but the history of it, in my view, is that HR leaders are not really rewarded for listening or empathy. They're rewarded for what they get done. And something Matt just said that I could really relate to, the number of executives and leaders I've had to talk to about how they treat their employees based on them not listening, let's just say it's a large number. And the number one excuse that those leaders use is, I'm too busy. I have to move too fast. There's too many expectations on my time. So therefore, I do not listen. I do not have time. And I think it's interesting to sort of turn the tables on them and say, well, gosh, have you ever thought about, if you stop to listen, would you save yourself some time? But as an HR leader, frankly, empathy has not been part of the recipe. And in some ways, it's not part of the recipe because you don't bring your personal problems to work. You don't, that was sort of how we were raised in HR. Don't go into anyone's personal home life, their viewpoints, because this is about the work, not what's going on at home. And these new generations, I have to say, not to generalize, but they are demanding more of this kind of empathetic leadership in the workplace. And my friend Bob Feldman, who I keep referencing the Dialogue Project, but his viewpoint, and I I think it's kind of interesting, is people have lost trust in the government. There's not as much church going as there used to be. The church is not the center of how millennials and Gen Zs are being raised as it was back when boomers and traditionalists were being raised. So more and more people are looking to their corporations or their companies for empathy, for leadership, for guidance, for parenting in some ways. And it's just become a different workplace because of that. So listening has become, I think, a more important aspect, but I'm not saying just because it's important, it's being done well. or being done at all in some cases.
That is fascinating because there is, I mean, based on HearMe, we know that there's a generational divide in terms of, well, first of all, how the need for younger people to express themselves and their willingness to do it and their almost demands for it versus an older workforce that maybe kind of what you said, church and state don't mix, right? So we all know the two big themes of this year have been, racial injustice and the recognition that there's a lot of problems here, as well as mental health. I mean, COVID-19 and George Floyd have really graphically illustrated these two real civic major issues that we're dealing with. So I guess the question would be, and I look at the workforce, I think of people in leadership roles, and then I think of people that work in the company. So I'm sort of, I guess, looking at it from the perspective of the level of employee, whether you're an hourly employee versus a top corporate person, because especially during the COVID world, who has to show up in a physical place versus who doesn't, across racial issues, and also how does that all affect mental health? So I know I just threw a lot of that out there. I'm going to open it up to maybe Matt, if you can maybe untangle some of that. But I think especially for this crowd, it's really interesting. And Courtney, Kimberly is not on the panel, and we're going to get to questions at the end. So we'll have at least 10 minutes. So please put your questions in the chat box. So Matt, you want to sort of see if you can take that big hairy beast and do something with it? You're muted, Matt.
Yeah, sorry. There's definitely, as you were kind of mentioning, there's a lot of different ways that the workplace gets divided, and it's going to be different based on the company, especially at places, so I've been at kind of two extremes where the military is incredibly hierarchical. There's, a dozen layers between or more between the frontline person and the top leader. And then in tech companies, which try to compress that and be a whole lot flatter. But I think, where these divides ultimately start from is that kind of lack of ability for you to put yourself in someone else's shoes or recognize that someone could have that there is a different way to grow up, a different way to become a productive worker than what you have done. And that then leads to all of these other issues, because I think, and that's where it gets interesting. I really follow the work of like Daniel Kahneman and the Undoing Project and all heuristics and biases. And so much of these problems stem from just the fact that our brains are designed to make decisions quickly, which means we take shortcuts, essentially. We base things off of what we've seen in the past, and then we make conclusions about the future. And that works if you are in a very, segregated society where the same people group together and stay the same. And in our world today, where we were becoming more interconnected, a lot of those assumptions that you're making don't hold true. And so that's what then leads to these divides. So I think ultimately that's what it comes back to, whether you're talking about racial divides, economic divides, where you are in the company divides, those are all going to vary based on the company and the culture that you have. But ultimately what they all come back to is a lack of ability, at least in my experience, it's a lack of ability to really understand where someone else is coming from and drawing the wrong conclusions on the future about what you've seen in the past. And that's then what leads to these problems with equity and everything else.
So Tracy, just to follow up on that theme, I mean, you work, for really big corporate clients, and you really focus, I think, on best practices and the notion of how do you effectively create a team that works together towards a common goal, in a way that embraces everyone. So I guess, to take that question, and if you could maybe speak about it a little bit from some of the work that you do in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then if there's any time sort of like how any of this all plays into mental health, and what are you seeing in terms of corporate leaders in terms of that understanding, or that could be a separate question. But I think it's really interesting looking at this from those two lenses.
Yeah, so I agree with what Matt was saying about listening. The other thing that came up for me, Matt, when you were talking is depending on who you are and what your background is, you have different expectations about how you will be listened to. And so marginalized people go through, by the time a person from a marginalized background reaches you and they're 35 years old, they've got 35 years of knowing that they won't be heard. And so oftentimes, that they're bringing that to the interaction. And so it just gets very complicated, right? And so people, even if there's an effort, they may not communicate with you in the way that you expect them to, right? And so a lot of the work that we've done with DEI, we don't do so much, people think I'll do bias training, I'll bring somebody in for an hour and they'll solve all our problems. But really, anti-racism is a practice. That is something that you're 40 years old, you've been doing it one way for 40 years, you've got to practice on an ongoing basis, how to kind of slowly peel back the layers of behaviors that you've assumed, that are oftentimes invisible for you. You don't even know that you're behaving in a certain way, right? And so it just gets very complicated when you're trying to get people from different perspectives to listen and communicate with each other.
I just want to ask you a follow-up question. Because the Listen First Coalition, this National Week of Conversations, is really engaged civically, and so many of the way seemingly, we look at the world now is through a political lens, right? So has that come up in the corporate world? Has people's political ideology or where they come in? How does that impact? Because I imagine a part of what you were saying for people who are not in underrepresented populations to even begin to understand that concept, that people come, so that's another layer that seems like a very difficult layer. So I'm just wondering if there's a conversation in the corporate world around that layer.
I do think it comes up. I will say I'm based in LA. I work a lot with entertainment companies, and I'm fortunate to be able to choose who I work with. So I think it's different when you're working with different types of corporations. I have friends who are consultants who have had some really uncomfortable interactions with more conservative leadership, who wanted to bring in someone to talk about things like equity, but really didn't want them to talk about those things. I'm in a good position because I don't have to take that work. But I do think that, the more diverse perspectives people are bringing in the workplace, if you got a workplace that's 10,000 strong, yes, people are going to bring those values.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Kathy, diversity, equity, inclusion, mental health, based on the newsletters that you send me and what I read about the world of the employee assistance programs and sort of where HR leaders are, those seem to be like two very big topics. So I guess if you can just talk about that a bit, and how does, this, just your thoughts on that, and where are we and what needs to be done and what is being done, and how far are we from sort of beginning to tackle this in a way that makes meaningful impact in employees' lives?
Well, what strikes me first is that listening can be the core solution to almost everything, right? Mental health and DEI. If we would just stop and listen to one another and consider each other's point of view, that's a really good start. And I do want to say what Tracy does so well, because I've worked with her in bringing her into companies before, is that she creates conversation around DEI. And so many people out there are doing programmatic fixes, which, as she mentioned, are like unconscious bias training. Okay, well, we know it doesn't work, statistically proven to not work, but it allows the corporate executive and leadership to check the box. Oh, we did it. Yeah. Doesn't matter if it worked, I checked the box. That's happening still and needs to stop. But, it reminds me of a conversation that Matt and I have quite often about the fact that we often make things way too complicated in the work environment. We think we need to programatize everything. We think we need to, create or practice HR. I guess I'll say it from my own perspective. We have a checklist of things that we bring into the workplace, and we're doing our jobs when we get that checklist done. The reality is, it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can bring everything down to its most basic level and just provide people with opportunities to talk and dialogue with one another. And that's really what Tracy does when she talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion. She actually brings people together to be able to ask questions that they've always wondered about. And how do I start a conversation with someone who is not like me? That's not happening in unconscious bias training. You're looking at a bunch of PowerPoint slides with things on it that really don't have a huge impact. So conversation, in my view, is everything, and providing forums for allowing that conversation. But first and foremost, teaching people how to actively listen. And I think I'm way off of what question you asked me, but I just want to say, I was sort of given I went to get my executive coaching certification, and I learned that all I have been doing for 25 years is doing. I've been doing. I haven't been stopping to listen. And a lot of people have the opinion that they make a good coach because they're really great at giving advice. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what a coach does. And if all leaders could sort of think of themselves as coaches, which is really just ask really good questions and listen to ask the next really good question, then we'll all be in a really great place to get people to find their own solutions. But that is not taught in the work environment. And I think that is something that we need to think more about. And that's why, like, Matt has been such a great partner in a lot of this, because he's developing training along these lines. And I'm going to throw it to Matt, because I think Matt has a lot to say on this subject.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, one of the conversations, I think it might have been that conversation or a different conversation, where I said, Matt, why is this not being done more? And I think Matt said, and tell me, Matt, you can please tell me if I'm wrong, but it's because it's too easy, right? The solution is too easy, and we want to complicate things. And so, so if you can respond back to Kathy, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think starting even back a little bit further in Kathy's comments about the idea of, like, as HR feeling we need to, like, over HR it or something. I recently came across what I thought was just, like, the perfect metaphor for so many things for leaders to think about. And that is, do you believe in stoplights or traffic circles? And that's really what a lot of this comes down to, because stoplights, they're very prescriptive. It's like they tell you exactly what to do. So it's really easy. You can be on complete autopilot. You don't have to think. You just show up and the system tells you every action to take.
Yeah.
But every study ever done anywhere says they are slower, cause more accidents, cause more damage than a traffic circle. But why don't we have traffic circles, particularly here in the US? It's because we're really uncomfortable with them. Most people don't know how to use them. And the first few times you use them, they're really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the way I think about a lot of this stuff. We try to create these traffic light solutions that will tell people exactly how to behave in every situation, because I think, honestly, a lot of people want that in their training. They would prefer to just show up and be talked to for an hour, maybe have some fun interactions, maybe do some fun things, but it's going to make it so that they don't have to be uncomfortable. Whereas if you create a situation where they actually have to work at it and try to do things, they have to get uncomfortable a little bit, but they're going to be a lot more effective in the long run. And so, kind of then to bring it back to the specific point about, to the comment the comment that you attributed to me about it's too simple. I think that's exactly right. When it comes down to, do we just teach people how to listen, or do we teach people this overarching hierarchy of this is what DE&I is, and this is how you apply it in the workplace? We're just overcomplicating it, and listening seems like too easy of a solution. But in fact, it's actually pretty hard to actually put into practice, because it's not something that most of us do day to day. And so if you just really simplify it down of say, no, really, for this week, I just want you to not start every sentence with a solution to someone's problem. You know, when somebody on your team comes to you and says, this is my problem, just for the rest of this week, promise me that the first thing you do will be to ask a clarifying question about that problem instead of immediately trying to apply a solution. Get them thinking for themselves, you know? And so getting it really simple and really discreet to the kind of real practices, real behaviors that we want people to exhibit day to day, that's the real way to change people.
Yeah, and you know, Matt, I agree with everything you said. And one of the things that came up for me when you were talking is this idea of being uncomfortable, that, you know, Western culture, we prioritize staying comfortable. We want our kids to be happy. We want to go to work and everyone's happy. And if that is your priority, you are not going to engage in a deep way with people who are not like you. So part of this whole dialogue thing is understanding that it's going to be messy. It's going to be uncomfortable. You may hear things that you don't like. People might be angry, but that just means that you're connecting, right? That's where you grow. That's where the growth edge is.
Yeah, I love that. I've done some workshops, and I always say prior to the beginning of the workshop, this is a comfortable place to be uncomfortable. And it also reminds me of my friend Tracy Ruby, who founded something called the Sidewalk Talks, which is amazing. You literally just go to sidewalks and talk to people. It's a wonderful organization. But Tracy says, solution's not the solution, connection is the solution. So it's really, for me, you know, it's interesting because it's so hard for me to connect with this corporate world. And because I sort of think, I guess to Matt's point, like we have to make it so much more complicated than it is. And I look at it as like, big buildings and elevators and, you know, and just a quick antidote. So I've always wrestled because I love business, but I had all these sort of moral qualms, and I'm sort of dating myself, but I went to a lecture with Ralph Nader where he said, not everyone who works above the 17th floor necessarily has to have a moral lobotomy. And for me, that sort of gave me permission to be able to like, hey, it's okay to make money. I want to do good things, but, you know, so I don't know, just hearing all of you talk sort of brought that up for me. So I guess, so we all, you know, the problems are very evident. And we have three people here who seemingly are very aware of the problems, and in their organizations and in their corporate lives are doing things to try to make it better. So I guess if I could ask just a very concrete question from each of you, like, you know, what have you seen? So we now know, according to Kathy, that unconscious bias training generally doesn't have the effect that you want, right? And people come out of it. And we had a meeting, you know, HearMe had a meeting with a corporation who, you know, well, what is, you know, people weren't getting it. It was going right over the head. It was making them angry, right? So I guess the question, very simple for all of you, is like, what is something that is working? And what's really effective, and what is something, if you said, you know, throw in the trash now and let's just give that one up, if you know, if you can answer one or both of those questions. So what's something that's really working that you're seeing happening now that you might have instituted or you see instituted that's helpful? I think circle idea, you know, Tracy's idea of getting people together, being uncomfortable, like as Brene Brown says, being in the rumble, but just, you know, specific things that work, and maybe some things that it's just time, they're not going to work. So whoever wants to jump on first is fine.
I'll start. I think what we try to do is get people, you have to start with an intention to actually bring awareness to your role in these issues. And I think that's where it doesn't work. If somebody like what Kathy so eloquently said, if somebody is just looking to implement a program and check a box, like, oh, we had a 1 hour training, we've got it. That's not, you know, that's not going to work at all. We do work with people on listening skills, right? So what we teach is 3 levels of listening. The first one is listening for content. So I hear what you're saying. The second one is listening for the emotion. What are you feeling? And then the third, deeper, which is more like a coach or someone in a helping profession, is listening for what is the real need. that the person has. Sometimes the real need that the person has is just to be seen. You know, if you really see a person, you can transform your relationship with them. And sometimes, you know, like I have a friend that's a therapist who works with boys and young men who've been under trauma. And one of the things that he says is if someone like that comes to his office, the first thing they'll do is they will trash his office. And they're looking to him to see whether he can sit with their pain. And if you can get past that, they can build a relationship, right? So that's one of the things that we do focus on, is teaching people those different levels of listening.
I love that. Kathy or Matt?
Well, I'll jump in. And I mean, honestly, I've tried so many things over the years that are kind of, you know, along the lines of the old suggestion box, you know, to listen. But again, I just want to say, you know, they're programmatic. And I'm going to say I've been enlightened literally in the twilight of my career in the last 6 months about the subject matter. And I'm really kind of upset that I just now came to the conclusion that the most important thing that we can do, and I've learned it from, I mean, Matt has taught me a lot, and Tracy too, I got to say, bringing everything back down to the basics, stop complicating things and just do the right thing for people and listen and lean in to who people are as opposed to your own point of view. And I wish that I had brought more of this training into the workplace, to have more just conversations, to open up the room to get people's opinions. I, you know, was part of the problem. I was programmatic HR for a lot of years. And I guess if there was one thing I think I would love to have, and I know we don't have all HR people on this call, so, but I think every single person on this call can think about how are they complicating things and creating something versus just, you know, listening. And I do think that what I learned in my 1 year as an executive coach in the school I went to is how to listen. And I got to tell you, it took 12 months to get there, because my first order of business was always to help someone find a solution, because I had had 25 years of training in how to do that, not to simply listen. And by the time I ended the program, I actually learned how to deeply listen. But I think more training in that inside organizations, or you yourselves getting trained in how to deeply listen, you'll be surprised what you don't know, I think, because we're all programmed to do. So
Yeah, I agree. And Cheryl and I, you know, Cheryl and Suzanne, thank you, and Courtney for asking some questions. So Cheryl, so I'm going to read Cheryl's question. How do you address the issue of someone in an organization who disagrees with the status quo and who is accused of, quote, not listening? And Cheryl, since we're a smaller group, feel free to unmute yourself and reframe that or jump in with the response when one of the panelists decides, you know, answers that question or responds back.
So I'll just give you a real life example. They're in a situation where, you know, there were multiple companies contracted to do a project, and you know, there was disagreements happening, and what I was perceiving as a lack of communication, a lack of collaboration amongst these different contracted entities. And whenever I rebelled against it and said, you're not listening, we need to do this, we need to do that, I was charged with, you're not listening. We have to protect our company boundaries. We can't tell them that. We can't do this. We can't do that. I wasn't listening to the needs of these individual companies because I was trying to promote collaboration. So I was accused of not listening. I didn't accuse them of not listening, but that was an example of me personally being accused of not listening because I was going against the status quo of companies maintaining boundaries of communication.
Matt, Kathy, Tracy, you want to take that one?
I'll take it. I think, without knowing the specific circumstances or where everyone's coming from, it's a little hard to address. But what I will say is, in a situation like that, first of all you can control is yourself, right? And oftentimes what I as a coach would tell people is recognize when you really know what the other party wants and when it's a story that you're telling yourself about what the other party wants. So question and test your assumptions about where they're coming from. So what we teach people is, speak about your own perspective with truth. You can speak your own truth to others and make an effort to kind of put yourself in their shoes, but you can't necessarily control how they're receiving that information. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Susan, if you want to unmute, but I'll, essentially, I'm reading your comment, courageous conversations and safe, trusted spaces, but at one point, do you want to explain
Yeah, Adam, I don't have a particular question. First of all, I was just saying high fives, to the, it's so obvious that it's very frustrating to listen to, frankly. You guys are so, beautifully articulate about it. Tracy, that was a magnificent coaching answer. It was just, beautiful. Because I come from that corporate side and played that role for decades, many decades. And even as an entrepreneur, providing services for also some decades. And just, Kathy, you're saying, oh, I wish I knew. When it's time, it's time. So I personally am just going, really, I've been studying for the last several years, in my 6th decade, the feminine leadership model and where that needs to, how to navigate that into the corporate space and how to language it. How to language it in a way that's acceptable and not, necessarily have to make a whole science about it. And you guys are just saying it really is very simple, but we haven't been brought up that way, most of us. And thank goodness for our generations coming up. I'm a big proponent of intergenerational collaboration and communication, another divide to bridge amongst many. And it's just gratifying to hear, a really distinguished panel who just cuts through it and gets it. And I just want to be part of the solution. So thanks.
Thank you.
If I could jump in really quick off of Susan's comments, because it just really made me think to your point of like the way things have been done versus what we need them to do. I'm actually right in the middle of reading Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And when you read that book, it's all about, I put it on my shoulders. I had to make the decision. It was, we were going to live or die based on my decisions. And that's it. That's the thing we're trying to change, is that we have a history, generations of these very successful leaders who are putting it out there as they were successful because they made the right decision. And I think we're just in a world now, which is, it's too fast, it's too complicated, there's too many stakeholders. We're not going to get to where we need to be as a people if we keep that as the only model. But it just, I think you read any leadership book from or most leadership books from the first person, and you get that true sense of like, oh, this is why it's hard to make this change. It's because this is the model that we've all been raised on. And so it makes it's hard, and it's just like, oh, but it should be so easy. But it's like, well, it's because it's a really big boat that takes a long time to push. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That's gorgeous.
Could I make an observation?
Please.
I don't know who AA is, but other than Matt and Luke and Adam, there's not one male listening in. And I'm making that observation because I'm curious myself about that fact, but also just, do we think that there's a gender divide in how we view listening and whether or not listening is important. And that may be a divisive question, but I'm putting it out there.
Fascinating. So AA just said, "I am a woman." So
AA is
a woman. She just posted
okay.
it. So fascinating. That's an absolutely. And I have a friend of mine who wrote a book, "The Business of Feminism," and it's brilliant. And blanking out on her name. Sorry. I'll remember it in a second. But it really talks very specifically to this. And coming out business from a feminist space can really change a game. And I want to applaud Kathy for a second, and I want to share what it meant to me, because I think this is, in my opinion, what is needed. When Kathy basically admitted to being part of the problem for a bit, and she said, "I was a problematic person," right? And we don't hear that.
Wait, I didn't call myself a problematic person.
Exactly then. How you said,
I was not I was a part of the problem. Yeah. I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, but I don't think we hear that enough, right? And I think when you said that, something softened inside of me, right? And I imagine it might have softened for other people on this panel, because it's real, right? And all of us have these feelings that we, and it's hard and it's very vulnerable. So to be able to express that, you've changed, for me, the conversation shifted to more of a heart-centered place. And again, I struggle with, I don't really know, how that functions in the corporate environment, which I'm learning from you all right now. But I just thought that was really important. And I heard, from an outsider's perspective and just based on the company that I have and my life experience, hearing that is really important. And it's not done enough, because something as simple as that, I think, that there was an inflection point, at least for me. Okay, so
and just as on that note, and I know you are a big Brene Brown fan. Vulnerability is linked to connection, right?
Yeah.
So the fact, if we could just teach more vulnerability and people admitting what they don't know, right, then they wouldn't think they had to have all the answers, and that would mean they'd be listening. So it's it's just another part of the recipe, I think, for success in the workplace.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier, I believe you said it, you are trained, especially corporate leaders, especially people in HR, I would imagine, to solve problems. That's your job. You get paid to solve problems. And the reality is, a lot of times when we solve problems, we're pushing people away, and we're not saying, I'm trusting you to make your own decisions and to be part of the solution for yourself. And I think that goes well beyond the corporate world. So I guess we have a little bit more time. I would like to ask each panelist, what's one thing they've learned or heard differently from one of the other panelists in this past 15 minutes? So have you heard anything that sort of reframed something for yourself that you're like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way, or sort of a little learning that you got out of this conversation with your fellow panelists? And whoever wants to take that one to start.
I'll start. One of the ideas that I feel like I need to contemplate a little bit more is whether this whole idea of listening is too easy. Like you guys are talking about that. I feel like it's hard. But it's simple. I kind of want to noodle on that a little bit. It's simple, but to me, it feels really hard.
Can I elaborate though and say, one of the reasons why I'm going to put it in the easy category, is because we all come with ears. It's like you don't have to go to Best Buy or anywhere to buy a piece of equipment. You don't have to create anything to listen. You actually come with the equipment. It's like, we all are born with it. So it's just an interesting, concept that most people, not all, but most people are able to come to every situation with the appropriate tools. It's just employing them. So I get the nuance of what you're saying.
And Tracy, I think you drew the distinction perfectly of simple versus easy. Because often, especially in engineering, the simplest solution is the hardest solution to find. Like that's the difficult thing. That's where you're iterating of, oh, I don't need this piece, or oh, I can, And so I think that's hitting it right on the head of it. It's the simplest solution, but sometimes that can also be the hardest solution. And I'll say, one of the things that I know I need to focus on is listening to you, Tracy, talk about, because most of my work has been working with working kind of from the bottom up, of working with those individual employees and frontline managers and teaching them. And I've always known this is important, but also just hearing you talk about really engaging with those top level leaders more is just so fundamental to all of this, and really focusing more on that.
Does anyone in the audience, does anyone have a question or a comment they want to share? You can unmute yourself if you do.
I have a comment. I have been, as sort of being in the peace building world and conflict resolution, I've been absolutely swimming in these conversations, for the last however many months, year. And there's something about this, I can't quite put my finger on it, that is so refreshing. This was like a really unique conversation in my mind. And yeah, there were some amazing insights that got me to think about things in a way that I haven't before. And thank you.
Well, I want to call out Courtney's amazing insight in the chat, which was perhaps the challenge is dumping baggage, not acquiring equipment. I think that's a real insight right there. Thank you for sharing that.
I think one of the things that I got out of this conversation is the necessity for corporate leaders to be part of a conversation, frankly. We hear a lot about, corporations sponsor, or they'll give money towards, or, but you don't, the quality of this conversation, I believe, to Courtney's point, is real, because there are not many of these conversations that happen. People tend to look at a corporate, it's a different world. And I think having leaders and people like yourself that are having conversations, I think it's important, because I think for me, there's this, this otherization of sort of corporate leaders, so I think that was really great. And I appreciate that. So Marianne just posted the great resources for communicating, connection, conflict equals energy, the art of authentic relating by Jason Diggs. Thank you. So we have a few more minutes, just a programmatic note. On Friday, HearMe is sponsoring, or having a conversation, listening across racial divides. The panelists, one is Katrina, is head of global peer support for Mental Health America. And this other woman, her name is Peg Fong. She's a reporter for The Economist, and they both bring their unique lived experience to that particular conversation. It's a very rich, important conversation. So you're invited to it.
What was for you yesterday? I forgot to tell you.
I'm sorry, what? Okay. So cool. So any final thoughts? I'm just, if you, my name, Adam@HearMe.app or LinkedIn, feel free to reach out to me for any questions on this. And I will just a shameless plug, Matt, who you've met, is basically helping to spearhead our corporate trainings. And if you want practice on being an effective listener, and forgetting about practice, but being a listener, you can check out our app and become a listener. So Courtney, can I send the registration for Friday to us on the list? Yeah, I think I can do that. How do I do that? Tracy, Courtney, email me, Adam@HearMe.app, and I'll email it to you, okay?
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks. I got frozen for a second. So any final comments or thoughts from anyone?
Cheryl, did you raise, I thought I saw it, were you waving or were you waving?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for the metaphor of traffic circles, because I think it's an awesome metaphor as far as like watching out for each other, merging, the flow. I think it's a great metaphor for how communication in organizations should work. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. As the other panelists know, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and so I got the idea from a podcast, of course.
He does, but Matt also, I feel like HearMe is so lucky to have him developing the training, and he brings all of that. I've had him speak at some of my clients' events, and he's got a very unique point of view on training that I think is very refreshing. So I just want to put that out there.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe all of the panelists are on LinkedIn. I'm sure they would be happy to sort of continue dialoguing with you. We're really grateful to be part of this National Week of Conversations. It's incredibly important. And I think, and I believe that we did add something a little bit different and a little, just another lens on this very big topic. So warm thank yous to everyone who's here. I see you, I hear you, and I validate you, and I appreciate you being here because you brought something special, your presence, and it made this hour, gave it a hint of transcendence for me, and it made it more than just a meeting, and it made it into something a bit more special. So I appreciate that. With that, I'm gonna end this. So thank you all.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.